Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Resilient Mind podcast. I'm Steve Nathanson with my good friend Andrew Marangoni. Andrew, how you doing today, brother?
Doing pretty well today. Enjoying, there was a little bit of sunshine. It's cold, but we take what we can get.
Yeah, I'm looking out the window. I see some nice blue sky today, actually, which is nice. Sometimes the cold brings the greatest clarity, actually, in the sky. So with that, actually, my friend, I know there's something you wanted to talk about that I think our listeners are really going to enjoy today. So I'm going to turn it over to you, my friend.
Sure. I've been going through some things over the weekend, and it made me curious about this topic and how I see it, how other people see it, how we deal with it. And that topic is our ability for allowing forgiveness to others, and what that looks like, and how feelings come up around each one of the situations that the deeper the slight, the bigger the penance you want to hold, or the grudge, and is that healthy, and what does that do to the person holding the grudge? And I just wanted to talk through some things, and maybe it helped people think about how we deal with other people impinging on us, and how we feel about that, and just basically things around that whole topic, because I think we're finding ourselves in a place nowadays where when people betray us, we write them off forever, and that doesn't leave much growth for either side.
I think at the heart of it really comes down to how do we truly kind of process and understand what we're feeling, and then allow that to then kind of determine our action versus the immediate response that maybe is more natural, and then having that dictate it and maybe feel anger and anguish. So I'm very curious to dig into this topic with you. Actually, I think it's a great topic for the day.
Sure. So let's take forgiveness at a superficial level.
Okay.
Right? Let's say a complete stranger says something that, just rubs you the wrong way. What is the definitive context of starting a conversation around forgiveness with that person? Do you want them to publicly be known how upset you are? How do you want them to pay penance? Is an apology enough? How sincere does the apology need to be? Do you even care about those conditions? Or are you able to forgive without having an apology? These are just some of the things that I'm thinking about, because I tend not to let somebody I don't have a relationship with hold any value towards me. So if we don't have a relationship and you say some dumb things, depending on the situation, the most that might come out is be like, hey man, why are you thinking like that? But I'm sure it's not going to come off like, oh, you need to rethink your life about how you're talking to me and how you're talking in the world. That's not my place. Sometimes there is a place for that, but sometimes there's not.
Well, it comes down to, what is it that I'm feeling maybe triggered on, and why am I feeling slighted? And then allowing me to understand that more fruitfully can help me determine the reaction that I want to portray. So there's a difference between, say, responding and reacting, right? Reactionary people, reactionary situations, we've got to jump on this immediate feeling that we have where everything is hectic and crazy. And we see this in the business world all the time, right? How many of us are spending all of our time working on urgent, important things that are always popping up, and I can never get to what I want to get to, and I feel like I'm running around with my head cut off and I just don't know what to do, and it stresses me out. It's a lot of people. But what happens when we take that step back and say, well, are we reacting or are we responding? And I think there's worthy elements of that are applicable here as well. when somebody does say something that triggers us or slights us, or maybe we disagree with, am I going to jump down their throat? Or am I going to take a moment to say, yep, okay, maybe I disagree and that's the natural reaction I want to have, but is that really the best thing in this moment to maintain this connection and maintain this conversation? And I'll use politics as an example because politics is a very polarizing thing. I may try to have a conversation with somebody and put something out there, but because of immediate defenses and the nature of that conversation, they may shut down. They may scream and yell, right? They may just jump on something. That's their natural reaction. And that's part of why it's so hard to have a conversation around politics, is because people are reactionary. They're not responsive. So same thing that we're talking about here, right? Is when I feel like someone's done me wrong, we're not devalidating that feeling. We're not saying it's inappropriate to have those thoughts. We're actually supporting that. Yeah, that's a natural part and a natural reaction to have, but we don't have to let that dictate how we respond.
Right. You know, and how you come about it, or is it, I feel slighted, so now you need to be slighted?
Right.
Or is it, I feel slighted, can I express to you why I feel that way so that maybe you have an understanding of what your actions did to me? Right?
Yeah.
Very different things, right? Or there could also just be that, you know, there's not enough connection there, and I can just walk away and just say like, hey, you know, it's cool.
Yeah.
You don't, you know, we don't have the relationship for this to affect me this deeply. You know, which is much different than like if you get betrayed by a friend, right? So let's talk about in that scenario, how much different the feelings can be and how much more intense they can be. Have you ever been betrayed by a friend, Steve?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I wouldn't say that I've ever been betrayed, like a huge movie level betrayal, let's say. But I've definitely had friends that I don't have anymore because through talking with them about certain things that did cause a disconnect, I don't feel like I was really listened to or heard. And at that point, I kind of made that decision of, well, you know, is it worth having this relationship if it always ends with me feeling badly or poorly, and the attempts that I've made to have conversations around it to rectify it don't really go anywhere. So perhaps betrayed in that sense, uh, but not like, oh, if they completely, you know, pulled the rug out from underneath me and stabbed me in the back kind of betrayal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I've experienced those on several different levels. Um, one was really interesting, which was I had a group of individuals that all played video games together, and we had kind of like a written unagreement or an unwritten agreement of how we play video games, and you know, we were trying to make all these things happen. And I was away visiting my father, and I came back, and one of the guys in the group had started a new group and taken all my members away from me, and like created this new division of the way that he thought that we should be playing video games together, which is, you know, an interesting thing to think about. Is just like the betrayal on that level is we've been doing things for so long in a certain fashion, and then without you talking to me about why you felt like you had to take this drastic action and go a completely different way, it was really weird. And what was even weirder was that he was brothers with another person that I played video games with and created the divide in his own house. And they actually got into a physical altercation over this.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good points in that story, and bear with me with this tangent. I'm going to bring it back actually to a very good kind of progression that we can outline and talk through for our listeners. But you're reminding me of something that I think it's Aziz Ansari, the comedian, said in one of their stand-up specials on Netflix. And he goes through with the audience a question about ghosting, right, in relationships. If you're not really jiving with that person, do you ghost? Do you tell them? Do you be very brutally honest, right? He kind of goes through this progression. And most people like, yeah, you don't say anything, you just ghost them, right? You stop responding. And then he flips it on the audience and he says, well, how do you feel when that happens to you, right? And of course, everyone's like, I feel terrible. That sucks. Why did someone do that to me? You're bringing out that illustration kind of beautifully. Is in these situations, we may say, oh, you know what? I disagree with the way Andrew's doing this. I think it should be somewhere different. You know what? It's not even worth me talking to him about it, right? I'm just going to do this. I'm going to do him dirty, right? I'm going to stab him in the back. I'm going to steal all his friends and set up this new group without even telling him. He's going to go away for the weekend. Too bad for him. But that's on one extreme side of the spectrum. But it's one of the spectrum sides that we tend to do a lot in our connections with people. On the opposite side is what you're talking about, having a conversation, right? It didn't happen in this example, but that's the extreme opposite of this spectrum, is to actually talk with people in it. And there is also the response versus reaction. I may just embrace my reaction, say, yep, I'm never going to talk to him. I'm just going to do this, and too bad, right? You're just letting your reactions take hold and then causing even a physical fist fight, right, in his own home. Or you're going to say, yeah, you know what? I don't necessarily like the way that things are run. I would like it to be different. Yes, it's frustrating. Yes, it's dealing with this over and over again, but let me have a conversation with him, right? And the same thing kind of from bringing my example in it, right? Yeah, I may have at first said, okay, I'm going to kind of let this slide. I'm really good friends with this person. All right, it's happened enough. Let me have a conversation, see where it goes. Great, we had this conversation. Feel like we had an understanding. Oh, it's still going on. Well, let me try to have a conversation again. Okay, that didn't really kind of work. It's still happening. Well, you know what? Unfortunately, it's not worth it at this point anymore. But I went through a progression, right? It's kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum that we're talking about with the conversation. So that's kind of my point in this tangent, is there's really this scale, if you will, this progression that allows us to shift away from the immediate reaction while embracing that reaction to figuring out what is going to be the best way for me to handle this situation, while also accounting for what level does this relationship hold for me. It may be an acquaintance, and there may be no importance there of carrying it forward, or it may be a long-standing friendship that is important for you and makes it easier to have those conversations because there is value. There's so much good that happens from this friendship and this relationship versus just letting it go immediately, right? Are we going to regret letting it go? Yeah. What are your thoughts?
Right, which is very interesting, right? Is that we get stuck in these little battles of holding on to, well, you did this thing, and until you do X, Y, and Z, I can't forgive you, or maybe I can't forgive you at all. But what I've found in my life is that holding on is more detrimental to me than it is to the other person. So what I've been practicing personally is allowing myself to forgive regardless of conditions, right? So I don't need you to apologize. I don't need to let you know that I forgave you, right? I just need to forgive you and move on with my life. Now, if I want more to do with you after the forgiveness, then I have to figure out how I am going to work through my emotions with doing that, which is a little bit different than being conditional, right? Which is like, you need to meet these guidelines so that I can forgive you. The forgiveness is already there. What I'm talking about is moving through is kind of like making sure that I am being clear with my communication and exploring the limitations and the boundaries of the new relationship that I want to have with the person, because, things come up. And like the old saying is, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. And I said it correctly. But, just to let go of things easily and not hold on to anger is something that is beneficial for you as a human being. And it doesn't have to be reliant on the other person. You can give forgiveness and clear it yourself. And then again, if there's no purpose to the relationship, you can just leave it there, right? If you want to have a relationship, then you have to start sketching out, like, how do I bridge this gap? What does that look like? How do I have a clearing conversation with this person?
Yeah.
And I need to be heard, and I need to make sure that you've heard me.
Yep. Yeah. Wonderful points. So actually, I'm curious, if you don't mind, I'd love to dig into some very specific, tangible steps for our listeners on how we do just that.
Sure.
Excellent. So with that, to your point, I think it starts with us. I say this a lot, right? It starts with us. Mastering ourselves is the first step that allows us then to extend mastery to others and understanding them. So in these examples, today, a lot of times, this is going to be the written word, text message, direct messaging, email. That's most of how we get our communication today. So there's a couple things. First, when I'm reading that text message, right, on my phone, when it comes up, that's naturally blending in with our background here on camera. Neat trick. When that comes up, what mood am I already in? I may already be kind of upset, right? And so I'm naturally reading those words through that lens, and it's going to taint how I'm reading it. And it's going to create a interpretation on those words that perhaps is not what the other person intended. And that's the crux of written communication, is you don't get the inflection, the voice, the body language, everything else that allows us, even as you're listening right now, to hear my voice, the pitch, the tonality of it, the pacing of it, the energy that is coming with it. You don't get that from the written word. So
right.
Yeah.
So like I say one sentence, how are you, my friend? How are you, my friend? Right? That's two different sentences with the exact same words.
Yeah. And it depends on how we interpret that, right? So what is our mood? How are we naturally maybe interpreting things at the moment is, I think, a very important kind of step in this communicative process, because it may not be on that other person, right? It may solely be on us that causes that issue. And then it's the question of, all right, I'm reacting this way. And by the way, it's completely natural. This happens to all of us, and that's okay. It's okay to react this way. What's important is, how do we handle that? Can we embrace that this is something that may naturally happen for me? That's okay, because I have the choice to move past that. So what Andrew's been talking about is, how do we manage the emotions around that? It may be, all right, you know what? I don't agree with that. That's okay. Yeah, I don't agree with that. That's fine. I can respond. I may need to get up and walk around. I may need to toss the phone on the couch, like, all right, whatever, man. And I may need to come back to it and say 5 minutes. There's a process for each of us that allows us to get out of that quote unquote negative headspace and to think more clearly and more peacefully, to be able to more fruitfully respond in the way that we truly want to, versus just reacting and letting that anger and aggression take over. So that's kind of step 2, right? Step 1, where am I at right now and what's feeding into this reaction? And then step 2, what is it that I'm going to deploy to allow me to come back down and then respond the way that I want to, that's serving. And that may be, Andrew, that actually kind of really rubbed me the wrong way, man. I sorry for putting that out there, but I just wanted to let you know, I'm sorry. Uh, I didn't take that. I didn't take that so well. So in the future, would you kindly refrain from maybe sharing that with me? It may be something like that too, right? Where we make sure that we're heard, that comes out. That's okay as well, but that's vastly different than maybe reacting like, Andrew, what the heck are you talking about? All right, that's wholly inappropriate. You shouldn't say this. You should never do that. Why are you doing that? All right, that's just rude. There are different reactions, right, to what's perhaps coming across in that text message. So let me pause there before I go any further and kind of turn it over to you for your thoughts on those two steps.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Taking a pause up to 5 seconds immediately gives you so much more control over your reaction, and you're already starting to contemplate into response. I remember listening to this episode of Hidden Brain where they were talking about violent crimes, and if you could take a deep breath before you acted in an emotion, it would reduce violent crime by like 25 or 30%. Just a deep breath. That's all it takes sometimes, is to just stop yourself for 1 second before. And I know it's hard. When those emotions hit, it's like you're a different person. And it takes practice and awareness to know certain things are going to get me to this place and I need to be prepared. Not always as easy when it comes out of the blue, or it's something that just pops out of nowhere.
Yeah.
But stop, think, address a little bit, is what's coming up for me.
Yeah.
And why am I feeling this way? What's at the core of that? Am I upset because this person said these words, or how they said them to me? Was it the tone? Was it the story that I wrote about what they were saying? And a lot of times it's that. Yeah. And it takes practice just to break it apart and think about it that way. Is what is the story I'm telling myself about what I experienced?
Yeah. A great trick actually with this is, am I going to regret this tomorrow? And I use that time frame because typically over a 24-hour period, people do kind of calm down and cool down from where they were and are thinking a little bit more, quote unquote, say rationally about it, or without the kind of initial reaction to it, if you will. So it's a great trick and a great question of, all right, I may just find myself in the middle of this act of writing a response to it, and then I can stop myself and think, am I going to regret sending this? And I should probably not send this now. It is a really good question and trick, because we may find ourselves typing, and putting a response down. But the beauty is we can catch ourselves in that moment and say, is this really going to be most serving for me? Am I going to regret this tomorrow? And if I'm like, yeah, I probably might, then that's a good indicator to take those 5 seconds to even get up and physically remove yourself from the environment you're in that's caused this stress reaction, and perhaps even put your phone aside, let's say. In conversations, that's a little bit more difficult to do. I think that's where the pausing, the taking the breath, maybe the physically shifting and moving our body weight, or even stepping around and kind of getting up from a chair, let's say, if we're having a conversation, they can help do the same thing in an actual conversation. So there's a lot of value in what you're bringing out, and it all is really kind of incumbent upon us to be in tune with how are we reacting in the moment, which again is natural, because the choice is how do we leverage that.
Right. And I think one of the ways you can do it in conversation is kind of like that clarity piece that we talk about, which is you can use it when you're triggered too. Is somebody says something and you just repeat it right back to them. Is like, I just want to be clear. What I heard you say is this. Is that what I'm hearing? And then, that could give them the opportunity to be like, whoa, no, that's not what I meant at all. Or they may be like, yes, that is what I meant. And you'd be like, all right, well, before we take another step, we need to talk about this, or we need to take a break because I need to process that thought.
Yeah. And some couples actually use this very successfully. They have a trigger word. I don't know, let's just use watermelon, right, as a random word example. But that agreement that they've put in place ahead of time lets that other person know, right, this is a word that we use. We use it when appropriate, but it's a word that we use to let you know this has crossed the line and that we need to take a break from it. That's actually been quite successful in a lot of relationships. So that's another thing with important relationships in our lives. We can set that context and that agreement up front to have, say, a word like that that allows it to be easier to take that break because it's understood inherently already and agreed upon by both parties that that's what this word means. And it's bringing out another very good point of a third dynamic here, and maybe a third step is understanding, what does this relationship mean to me? Because if it's someone I just met and it's an acquaintance and I don't necessarily see a whole lot of kind of future there, friendship wise, romantic wise, whatever it may be, and there's not a ton of history there, it may not necessarily be important for me to continue this relationship. But if it's someone that I've been friends with for years and have a strong relationship with, then there's a stronger likelihood it is much more worth the effort and time to overcome the reactions and to be able to successfully try to talk through them through responses versus reactions. And what steps do I need to take? I'll give you a prime example. I have a really good friend, and we tend to be a little bit opposite politically. However, I have to say that we actually agree on much more than I think they think that we do. And that actually often comes out when we have rational conversations around it. But part of it is there's such a strong response I recognize kind of on their part that they want us to not talk about politics and have that agreement. And I'm fine with that, right? This is a really good friendship for me. And there's so much value that I have in it that I will make that agreement. And I'll never talk about politics, say, with them or bring it up because I respect that friendship. The friendship for me is more important than us disagreeing on certain things that I think we inherently already agree on anyways. But it's not worth it, right? So we've had that conversation. We've put that agreement into place. And we haven't just said, you know what, okay, you disagree with me, so we're going to walk away. No, there's so much more meaning and value in that relationship for me than just walking away from it. It means more to me. And that's this third dynamic and this third step as we're talking about what's coming up for me right now, maybe causing my interpretation to be, say, skewed. How do I want to respond and what am I going to do to come back to it? We also have to consider, what is this relationship truly worth for me? Sometimes it may be a strong relationship that at certain points you say, you know what, this isn't worth it anymore because it has turned to be more negative than positive, more non-serving than serving. And if that's truly the case, that's okay too. These are just simple things that we can do to help. And they're also important for your initial context of the conversation today, Andrew, is when I feel slighted, what can I do to help forgive that other person? And all of these things come into play to do that, to say, you know what? Yeah, I am going to move past this and forgive that other person.
Right. And again, it's for you. It's not about the other person. And I think one of the things that really harbors resentment towards others is when things go against our beliefs or our thoughts, right? Is to then forgive is allowing that space in this place where I don't want that, right? But that's not necessarily the case. You're not allowing that because that's not how I personally think about it, is you're not practicing those things. And just because that person may have practiced those things, if there was a habitual thing of this person doing this and there's no remorse, yeah, maybe you sever ties. But sometimes people make mistakes and sometimes forgiveness is in order. Yeah. And, like you said, sometimes it's something like politics where it's just going against how you feel or how you tie in. And those things cause distance. And sometimes it's hard to have a conversation and allow those things to happen.
Yeah.
But when it comes to forgiveness, is you can let go of those things and just say, like, I value you as a person. And at times people have behavior and words and thoughts that are unsavory. But again, it comes down to the practice of that, how much you're digging in on those things, and how much friction and distance they create between us.
Yeah. And I think there's a universal truth that is, if we can never have a conversation around something, we're never going to solve that problem or that divide. And the divide is just going to go stronger and stronger. And it becomes quintessential, an important part of that is, can I embrace the fact that we are all different? We are all human. We all make mistakes and screw up. It's part of who we are. And that's okay, because they're important things for us to learn. But when it comes to other people, giving them that same recognition, being able to forgive that and say, you know what, yeah, you're a unique person as well, and you have different beliefs than I do, but that's okay. That doesn't mean that you're wrong or a terrible person. It just means,
Oh, you got me kidding me.
it just means that they have different beliefs. And if we can't even embrace that that's acceptable, we're never going to have a chance of having that conversation. But if we can embrace the fact that it's part of this unique nature of being who we are as human beings, and that's okay, and I can forgive them for maybe saying something that set me off, then it opens up that possibility to have a conversation. And that's the beauty that allows us to actually start bridging the divide, is to be able to talk through it. And we may ultimately disagree when we're done talking, and that's okay too. But at least we have the open friendship to have that conversation and start trying to bridge that gap wherever it takes us. If we never have that conversation, we'll never start to overcome the challenges and hurdles that we're facing today.
Right. No, it all starts with understanding and getting to the core of things. Root versus symptom. And a lot of times these small slights are symptomatic. They're not root problems. There are, anything from that person was having a bad day and, used the wrong tone to, whatever. I lost my train of thought there. But that happens, right? Is, you're doing well for a second, and then, all of a sudden your brain messes up and has a hiccup. And
it's Eric, man, I forgive you for it, because it's part of who we are, right? If you've ever had a conversation, you're like, yeah, so I kind of completely lost my point. Or I just struggling to find that right word, right? You know what we mean. And that's okay. That actually is a good example, because it's much easier for people to forgive that, because that's a common thing that we've all gone through and we understand that, right? So you're like, yeah, no worries, no problem. It's fine. But when it's something that's tied more deeply, that's where we run into these issues like we're talking about.
Right, exactly. And when you get into those things, again, it becomes an awareness practice from you. It's part of resiliency. Is I know my triggers and I know how I can respond when I see this.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can be deep thinking on, when I see this in the world, what's the change that I want to be to make a different response than what's been currently happening. Because to just go off on people and say, you're stupid, you're wrong, shut up, change your mind, isn't going to ever do any of those things.
Right.
That is defensiveness that we use to make ourselves feel better.
Right. And then what happens after that, right? I'm sure you walk away and you're thinking about that. You mull that over throughout the day, and it causes you anxiety, it causes you stress, it causes you anger. Does that truly serve you? Right? The answer is no. So in that situation, right, who does it actually help? And I think the answer there is nobody.
Right, exactly. I looked up this quote, and I don't know if it's a quote or something I made up, but in a war of righteousness, there are no victors, only two losers claiming victory.
Hmm. Interesting truth. Yeah.
Right? Because no one's admitting they've lost, but they both have.
Right.
Because they have failed to forgive and they've failed to see the other person as valuable.
Yeah. So to that point, in this whole process of self-forgiveness, 3 key steps that really stand out. Number 1, our self-mastery. What is interpreting this conversation for us, right? What am I already kind of going through in the day that's going to skew or help me understand, right? We may be very calm and peaceful, and that's helping us really embrace what that other person needs and causing this to be, say, non-starter, non-issue. But a lot of times, it's a good question of what influences am I facing currently that are causing me to not pick up on what that other person is saying and maybe making me more reactionary. Then that second step is when I become more reactionary, what is my process to help me come back down from it? Deep breathing, walking away, physically removing me from my environment, going for a walk, a run, playing video games, going for a drive. There's endless different things that work for different people. What's going to help me come back down and be able to have that fruitful conversation? That third thing we talked about is, what is this friendship worth to me? Or this partnership work for me? Or the significant other relationship worth to me? That does play a role and a factor for us as well. All of that combined helps us become more responsive versus reactionary. And it makes it easier to forgive that other person if we are understanding in that fashion as well. Because if there's importance for that relationship, I've been able to come back down and curb what's naturally risen up inside of me. It's easier to say, yeah, you know what, actually, Andrew didn't mean anything by that. I know that. It happened to trigger me, and that's a trigger of mine. I know that as well. Sorry, man. I didn't mean to react that way. It becomes easier to forgive them, but also to forgive ourselves as well. So those 3 steps, I think, is what's come out to me as a recap for today. Is there anything perhaps that I've missed or you would add to that, Andrew?
No, just, take that moment to reflect and, ask yourself the one question. Is my response a reaction or a response? Do I want to intrinsically just let out my emotions and deal with the consequences? Or do I want to just take a moment and think about my next action and the consequences that may follow because of that?
Yeah.
That a choice to take a step back, assess, and then move forward.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I actually want to bring out one last thing.
Sure.
And this is something that I think we can leave in the episode, actually. A phone went off in it today. It's a natural part of things that happen. And we see, am I reacting or am I responding? And if I take everything that we've talked about, Andrew, I kind of saw you go through these steps. Oh man, my phone's going off during our podcast. I wanted to stop. And then I lost my train of thought, but we came back down, right? You never got really aggressive or angry, but I could see that reaction part of like, oh man, well, this is happening. I need a moment to gather my thoughts again and then jump back in. And I, apologize maybe for putting you on the spot, but I thought it was actually a beautiful illustration of everything that we've talked about. And you could see the kind of the progression happen of, I had that choice. Yeah, things come up. I naturally like, oh man. And I would have done the same thing if I actually muted my phone before us today. I remember to do that, but I would have gone through the exact same thing. Like, oh man, my phone's going off during a podcast. Sorry, Andrew. And it probably would have taken me a moment as well to go, okay, where were we? Where in the conversation were we? So I apologize maybe for putting you on the spot there again, but I thought it was a great illustration of this.
No worries whatsoever. I don't mind being the example. And one of the funny things is that my phone's almost always on silent. So when it started ringing, like it must have gotten the ringer turned on in like my pocket or something. And I was
Yeah.
just like, why is my phone ringing? Um, and because I'm on my computer and they're like sync to, like the button to dismiss wasn't coming up. So I was like, why is it
Right.
got to be more complicated?
Real
And
life.
right, exactly. But I did work through all that, and I was
Yeah.
just like, I know, whatever. Here's the thing, is that this podcast is not about perfection. It's
Right.
about progress. And I think our listeners, as you, even if you can go back, you can see progression in our ability to communicate or the flow of our conversations. There's always a progression of our relationship
Yeah.
showing up as each episode goes by and time goes by. Steve and I's relationship continues to grow. We
Right.
continue to grow as people. And that's it. That's why we do it. We want to just share that with you,
Yeah.
and hopefully inspire and motivate others to be a little more human.
Yeah, and I really appreciate actually the words that you just mentioned, because very much like you, I am more than happy to sit here and talk about things that I've gone through in life and share experiences with everybody and you, because we aren't perfect, and that's okay. And I'm never going to purport to be perfect. And I think it's important, especially in the world that we live in today and what we see in television and media, magazines everywhere. We have this image that we're expected to uphold and portray and that we see within others. And it often causes us to feel bad about ourselves because we're not, quote unquote, living up to that, because we are different, because we are human. And not everything always goes according to plan. And that's okay. So perhaps a bonus sentiment from the episode today is it's absolutely okay to be who you are, the way that you are, and that things happen in life that don't necessarily live up to what we would expect or what we want, because guess what? That's the same for all of us. And that's okay. That's what bonds us together. I'll get off my soapbox.
Uh, that's so funny that you said that. Anyway, that's a conversation for another day.
Sir.
Until next time, be the movement in your life, and we will see you on the next episode of The Resilient Mind.